But one of the things that California YIMBY works on quite a lot, in addition to zoning reform and some of these other high-level blockages to housing, is really getting into the details around the barriers embedded within the regulatory administrative apparatus in our cities to building more homes. One of the things that cities will do, among many things they'll do, to make people basically get frustrated and go away instead of building a house, is they'll have these very long permit review processes. So, for example, again, use the city of San Francisco because it's an egregious example. It's not unique. It can take you 2.5 years to get through the permit review process before you've even gotten to the point where the planning department says, okay, you can move on to the next step. But then you've got to go through design review and community input. And so it can actually take you realistically 10 to 12 years to build a house in San Francisco. Heaven forbid you're trying to do multifamily. So one of the things that we've been working on at the state level and some laws we've passed, in addition to reforming the fees, so doesn't cost you more to get the permit than it does to build a house, is we helped pass a law called the Permit Streamlining Act. And so now what that means is for homes that are proposed within a particular neighborhood that are compliant with all the existing regulations, so you can actually show the planner like, hey, look, like all the rules you have, like I'm in compliance, they've got to issue a permit within 90 days. And what happens if they don't is you get to just go right to plan check. You can sue them if you need to, but the point is they can't stop you at that point. They've basically forfeited the right to do ministerial review and you're considered compliant. And so now you can go and pull your permit. And so cities are still abusing that process, but it takes a while for all these rules to kind of percolate into the administrative state. There is a problem with the culture of some of these departments. They become so accustomed to just saying no and blocking things. In some cases, it's intentional. Like city staff will reflect the will of the elected officials often. If you elect an NIMBY, you should expect the city to be NIMBY. And vice versa. If you elect a YIMBY, you should expect the city to be more pro-housing. That process is underway, and it's a combination of state law that we're working on and the fact that you do have more voices at the local level and people getting elected at the local level saying, enough of this. We've tried this 40-year experiment with not allowing more housing. It's failing. We've got to try this other approach. It does take time for the culture to shift within any organization. Sometimes you do need to change staff. It's true. But I think that the laws we're passing, plus the local changes that are coming through local activism, are combining to start to lubricate things. And I would guess that in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll see this really turn around. Among the many crises that the housing shortage is unleashing, it's exacerbating the climate problem, it's exacerbating poverty, it's pushing workers out of the state, we're losing revenues. All of these problems are compounding. One that is very urgent and has actually been on the agenda of people who advocate for the elderly and retirees for some time is this issue of becoming more increasingly isolated as you age. The AERP, the American Association of Retired People, has actually been talking about this for a really long time, very progressive and thoughtful about what needs to happen. Seniors are getting stuck and isolated in their suburban homes, and those who can afford it are actually driving a lot of the demand for urban housing. So if you go to the downtown area of San Francisco or Berkeley or New York or Washington, D.C. or any of these cities, you actually see a huge number of older people who have either already moved there in the last 10 to 15 years or in the process of downsizing and buying a condo and moving to those places. Now, that's restricted to the people who are either thoughtful enough to think it through and time it right or who had the resources to do so. That's not most Americans. Most people, their home is their only asset. And when they sell it, they're expecting to retire on the income that they make from that house. Now, the problem is if you sell your suburban house and the house in the city center is more expensive, well, not only can you not buy it, but now you have no passive income. And that's a growing crisis across the country. As we start to hollow out the workforce, it gets even more dire because if you lose your ability to drive and you live in an area that's not a walkable neighborhood or isn't within a short distance from a grocery store, and you can't afford home health care or Medicaid won't cover it, or there just isn't that nurse available anymore because they've moved to Nevada or Florida because they can't afford housing either, you start to see a wave of possible catastrophes across these suburban areas where retirees have built their lives, have have set themselves up where they thought, okay, I'll be able to sell this and retire somewhere comfortable, and realizing there's nowhere for them to go. And states and cities don't have a ready solution for this. The hardest part about the housing shortage is it took so long for it to get this bad. Even if California EMB were 100% successful and we achieved all of our legislative victories tomorrow, it would take 3 to 5 years, 7 years before you'd start to see real progress on that. And some of these folks in their 70s and 80s, they're facing these crises now. And so something that I think we're probably going to need to look at, and I'm sure others are as well, is what do you do in the interim? Cities have really screwed over really everybody except the rich. It's seniors, it's workers, it's low-income people, it's teachers, it's police officers, it's people of color. Everybody is being harmed by these anti-housing policies that our cities have passed. And some of that harm is going to be very hard to mitigate in the short term. I'm very grateful. I've been thinking about this for a long time, and I actually had a series of conversations with my mother about this problem. And she listened and very timely sold her house and was able to move into the urban core of Washington, D.C. And now she walks everywhere. She has a grocery store on the corner. Her friends are close by. She's got a tight community. She's well taken care of. Her costs are very low. And so I know it's possible, and I really hope more people think about that. And I actually think there's a huge opportunity for older people and retirees to actually engage their cities on this. If they haven't thought about it, I would encourage them to start thinking about it, because you might feel like, it's never going to happen to me. Like I'll be able to drive everywhere. That's not going to be my problem. It is going to be your problem. And you really need to think it through now, because once it actually hits you, it's too late. You're going to find yourself in a position where it's very uncomfortable, and it's going to be very hard for your family to help you. And it would be really unfortunate if it gets if we just let the worst case scenario unfold. Really, the last 100 years, the United States has led this experiment in, can you have a viable civilization built on car culture? Can you sprawl out in all directions and let people live these suburban dreams with the white picket fence and the big lawn and the giant house? And everybody gets to have that, and everything works out. And what we're learning is that there's a reason human habitations evolved the way they did. Cities are about 8,000 years old as a human technology. I think of a city as a technology. It's adaptive. We started living in cities for a very specific purpose that served our well-being. And I sort of feel like that's kind of the definition of a technology, is something humans make to serve us. With the advent of car culture, we kind of swerved and said, oh, you know what? Let's see if we can do it some other way. Let's see if that 8,000 years of emergent habitation was actually wrong. And we can improve on that in this other method. And what we're finding, and it's only been 100 years, and I think this is really important for people to realize. I like to think, I studied geology and I've studied astronomy, and so my time scales, when I zoom out, I'm like, what's the real time scale here? The real time scale is, it's a 100-year-long failed experiment. That the emergent property of people living in villages closer together, in multifamily, multi-generational housing, where you could walk to the market, where maybe you needed some other way to get around, but it wasn't necessary for you to survive, that was actually a biological imperative. We evolved living that way for a reason. And the notion of trying to swerve away from that, because now we've got a combustion engine that can take us 150 miles in 2 hours, and then we can replace all these other features with that, is really absurd. We're finding that that's actually, I think, true, that you can't solve these human needs problems in a sprawl pattern. That what happens is, at the end of that Ponzi scheme, things really do collapse. And we're now facing, I like to use this term, it's not foreboding, it's try to get people to activate. Like, I want to see people wake up and realize, I can do something about this. This is a problem, but it's not insoluble. Everybody can actually play a role. But we're now in the era of consequences. We made a lot of bad decisions over many decades about how we live and where we live. We now have consequences for that we cannot look away from. The homelessness, the air pollution, the isolation, the poverty, the people being displaced, These are all consequences of that same set of factors. But the great news is, if you just go down the street to City Hall, you can start to turn it around. People have much more agency than I think they realize in correcting this, because while Congress is very far away and it's, everybody's like, oh, how are we going to fix the United States and the country's such a mess? That might be true in Washington, D.C., but the elected officials who represent you and determine how your community grows and what your neighborhood looks like, they're right down the street from you. And if you go and have a conversation with them and make it known that you have a particular point of view on this, they have to listen to you. So I get hopeful because I realize that the problems that we're facing have actually been created by a small minority of very loud, very selfish people. And what the YIMBY movement represents at a very high scale is actually this giant majority that's saying, wait a second, we never agreed to all this. It's just that we didn't know the proper venue to engage, or some of us have day jobs and we don't have time to go to City Hall every day, right? But now the movement is awakening. And I am pretty confident that over the next few to several years, less than a decade, we're going to see a huge shift in how we think about all these issues related to housing and transportation, and hopefully really start to turn our cities around.